Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Jewish Democratic Initiative's event, Women in Peace. We're honored here to host this event and grateful for everyone's attendance. We sort of want to start off just with a recognition of the violence that's happening in South Africa and the many people who weren't able to join us tonight as a result of the violence, and we hope that all of you at home are safe and healthy. The Jewish Democratic Initiative was started in 2017 as a response to the 50-year anniversary of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory. Africa who feel the need to speak out on the basis of their Jewish principles about breaches of democracy, both in our own community and society and in Israel. JDI honors the long tradition of South African Jews' involvement in the struggle for human rights and justice, and we seek to reconnect our community to these traditions by word and by deed. And we're funded by community members and most importantly by the annual membership fees of our members. Our membership costs 360 Rand or 36 Rand for students, pensioners, and those who've been financially affected by COVID. We encourage you not only to consider donating to JDI, but also to consider donating to the organizations represented by our speakers tonight. And I'll put the details of the three organizations in the chat just after we begin. Israel is in a moment of transition. The possibility for change, not only politically, but also socially, seems more tangible than it has for decades, and women are at the forefront of this movement. In a political arena dominated by military men and a social arena dominated by divisive ethno-politics, women are making their mark and transforming the imaginations of how collective identity can be expressed in Israel and Palestine. Shared society institutions, military watchdogs, legal and counseling services, and political parties are increasingly being led by women from across ethnic and political spectrums. This phenomenon begs attention and questions, including what is the gender context of Israel-Palestine and its social movements? What unique perspectives and methodologies do female and feminist activists offer? And most importantly, how can they be supported to grow? The session will run for about an hour. Each speaker will have between 10 and 15 minutes to present to us, and we will follow and end off with a Q&A. We do encourage you to put your questions in the chat room as the event unfolds. And importantly, we encourage you to approach these presentations in line with our values of open-mindedness, humility, and respect. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our three speakers tonight. I will do it in order of their speaking. Sally Abed is 30 and is a staff member and elected member of the national leadership of Standing Together. In recent years, Sally has become a prominent Palestinian voice in Israel that is putting forward the holistic view that identifies the interrelation between the ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories, growing social economic disparity, society, the threat of climate change, and attacks by the government on democratic freedoms and Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel. Jessica Montel has been a leading figure in Israeli society for over 2 decades. She is now the executive director of Hamoked, which provides legal aid to Palestinians from East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, and conducts strategic litigation on behalf of human rights. Jessica is a frequent speaker and commentator on human rights, international humanitarian law, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In 2013, the UK-based Action on Armed Violence selected her as one of the 100 most influential people working to make the world a safer place. And last but not least, Fida Narataboni is the director of the Haifa office of Shatil, the New Israel Fund's action arm. She was born in Nazareth, grew up in Neve Shalom, an Arab Jewish village, and has 2 daughters. She holds a bachelor's degree of social work from Tel Hai University and a master's degree in gender studies from Bar Ilan. Besides her passion for learning, Fida is committed to advancing social justice. For the last 25 years, she has dedicated her life to women's empowerment and social change. Fida is a member of the National Secretariat of Hadash and was number 8 on their list during the 2019 elections. Fida worked as a coordinator of the awareness raising project at Women Against Violence for 13 years and became the director of the Social Change Unit. She was co-director of Mahapach Tahir, a grassroots feminist Jewish Arab initiative, and began working at Shatil in April of this year and works to promote and strengthen shared society as well as Palestinian civil society in Israel. amazing speakers we have tonight. So thank you all three of you for joining us. And yeah, Sally, if you'll take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me and for joining us. Okay, so I'm gonna really give you a little bit, maybe a wider picture of how I see our challenges and our realities as youth, as Palestinian youth here in Israel. And then I will go more into the issue of women and how Palestinian women really have yet another layer of complexities within the situation. So let's start with the bigger picture. Let's start that Palestinian youth in Israel, 40% of them are considered unoccupied, which means that they have no professional, social, nor academic framework. It means that these people are really, they live in marginalized communities that have they have almost no prospect, no professional, academic, or social prospect, which really can be only a product of a really marginalized communities. This also, of course, feeds and fuels the pandemic that we have. And no, it's not the corona pandemic, but really the pandemic of violence and organized crimes in Arab towns in Israel, which really fuels, and it really is a feedback system of this phenomenon of really a high percentage of youth that really have no framework, they have no occupation. And it really is a problem that has not been addressed properly, not the illegal weapons, the hundreds of thousands of illegal weapons that we have in Arab towns that are taking the toll of, tens of lives, and taking the toll of tens of violence and hundreds of attacks and violence and insecurity within Arab towns. And we really live in a place that is very, many of these environments are very hostile at the worst, and just very not providing any kind of opportunities, and not really promoting any kind of prosperous life at the best case scenario. That's a very important I always really start with that picture, because I think it's very seldom that people think about Palestinians within Israel as a crucial part of the situation and of the conflict resolution, in a sense that, we are the most probable partners for peace within Israel. We are the citizens who are actually, working with the Jewish Israelis. We are studying with Jewish Israelis. We live with them. We shop in the same places. We coexist, and I'll talk about coexistence, which is not necessarily a good word, but. Let's also talk about Palestinian youth in mixed cities, which we saw, it was a ticking bomb that really, exploded in our faces in May. Unfortunately, in Yafa, in Lid, in Haifa, where we saw a lot of, they call it intercommunity violence. I don't think it was intercommunity violence. I think it was a lot of outsider settler attacks on mixed cities, and a lot of looting, and a lot of anger and protest from the Palestinian youth within these cities. I live in Yafa, which was one of the hotspots, during May. And I saw for months before May, since really early within the year, many provocations, many escalations, a lot of violence from settler groups who are trying to basically Judaize, who are trying to take over these Amidar housing, this housing that were provided to Palestinians after they lost their homes in 48. I'm not going to go too much into details with that, but we see a very complex, very difficult and violent stories in mixed cities that really have been boiling for years, and we saw them exploding during these times, in May, during the escalation and the war and the aggression on Gaza. And these cities also are, they also experience a lot of poverty. They're extremely marginalized groups, also mostly, in Yafa, for example, 70% of the kids from these areas actually don't finish high school. Again, they do not have any prospects in that matter, which also, again, fuels organized crime and smaller crimes and drugs and violence. These patterns, they come in contrast with an increase in Palestinian youth getting an education or training that helps them to be more and more engaged, actually more engaged than ever within Israeli society and economy. So we have like a very contrasted patterns for Palestinians. So you have, the extremely marginalized and really 40% that are, being unoccupied, and you have unprecedented amount and level of incitement and racism, especially from the government and from the Bibi government. But then you also have the pattern of really increased engagement, and you have more and more and more people getting education, more and more Palestinian youth really getting being equipped to be fully engaged within Israeli society and economy. And these people, they come back to their towns, to their villages, to the Palestinian towns, which have, that cannot absorb their skills. It doesn't have any companies, it doesn't have any organizations, any offices, any employment, it doesn't have any frameworks, good schools to absorb their kids, as young families, and it doesn't have any frameworks for them to run a prosperous life. And from there, some of them, because they can't do that, and because there's a huge housing crisis, they move to the nearby Jewish town that now has become mixed cities, but are not recognized as such. We're talking about Carmiel, we're talking about Nofa Galil, which is next to Nazareth. We're talking about Ma'alot here in the Western Galilee. However, they do not offer any type of framework. They do not have Arabic schools. Some of them, very few, have like very, very few, extremely selective kindergartens. And again, they are not a good environment for Palestinians. The reason I really talk about these things in general is because it's important for us to portray our realities as I'm very sorry about the barking. I hope you can't hear it too much. I'm very, very sorry. It's very important to really understand that, because I think a lot of people really talk about, the Arab Israelis or the Arabs in Israel as something, something that's there and they're living there and they're coexisting, they have their rights, but we are a crucial part of getting to the point where we can actually build a struggle, where we can build a narrative that really encompasses our narratives, both as Palestinians and as Israelis, and our space to develop that kind of narrative as Palestinian, okay? Before we go into the partnership of Arab-Jewish partnership, it's completely, limited. It's extremely, extremely limited, like physically, as well as consciously, as well as academically, and in the public discourse. It's just not there. We really don't have the opportunity to really build our aspirations, not just as Palestinians who want to fight against the systematic discriminations of Arabs in Israel or against the occupation, but also as youth, as women, our feminist struggle, or our struggle against climate crisis, our struggle against the housing crisis, or against the public transportation, or against economic issues. And these are things that we really don't have the space to do, because we are either stuck to be the Arabs as partners within the left, or stuck as, the enemy, or this illegitimate partner from the right. And we never actually are something that can advance any kind of political, social, or economic issues. Give me my time, because I could, do I still have time? Because I want to have another point.
9 minutes.
9 minutes, amazing.
So like 5 more minutes left.
Amazing. So that's one reality of our youth. Now, if we talk about women, that's a very, very special experience, but I don't think it's special just for Palestinian women. I think a lot of us, are experiencing this empowerment. We are getting more educated. Many women are earning more than men within the Arab Palestinian society here. And we are experiencing that kind of empowerment alongside a lack of, we are being empowered without providing our male partners with the tools to really understand what's happening. Our male partners are also come from patriarchal societies, and we really have that kind of tension. So before we start talking about Arab-Jewish partnership, we also, we also need to always acknowledge the fact that we have so much internal affairs to really develop our political entity as partners. And I think that's what really will strengthen the Arab-Jewish partnership as something that is really wholesome and something that is really sees the interconnectedness between the struggles, of peace, equality, and social justice. So that's about women in general, in a empowered women and feminist struggles in patriarchal societies that really don't acknowledge the fact that we also really need to empower men in a sense, not in the traditional sense, but in the sense that they can actually run a household where a woman earns more than you. I don't think we don't have that, and it's something. It's a problematic. It really is problematic, and we are seeing it, and we don't have even male partners who can manage this kind of conversation with us. So all of that, we are having our own awakening, our own, our space. And I think in May, you really saw that we are, we started demanding this space to really develop our narrative, to really develop our story. Also as women, as Palestinian women, but also as Palestinians, Israeli citizens. What does that mean? It also is a very complex identity to be Palestinian in Israel, and also, battling this partnership with a Jewish Israeli narrative, which, has a historic hegemony over our narrative. So how do we really battle that without acknowledging what we are and demanding the space to really understand what we are? So there are two things that are happening. One is the awakening of the very few minority that are really refusing to collaborate with shared society. You have even many amazing feminist movements that are really, demanding and insisting on having a separate struggle as Palestinians. And then you have the shared society, which I am part of. And I don't see a contradiction, in a sense that I don't see, as long as we can feed on each other, and we can feed on the information and feed on the developments of each other, then it will definitely go into the right place. In May, we really saw an unprecedented solidarity from the Jewish left and from the shared society. And we saw that it has developed amazing organizational capacities that we did not have previously. If you really asked us 5 years ago, if tens of thousands of people would go out on the streets while there are bombings on Gaza and there are insane violence in mixed cities and on the streets between Palestinians and Jewish Israelis, you would be very, very skeptical that that will happen. And we really noticed, and we really observed that we have gained an unprecedented ability to actually mobilize people towards peace and towards partnership, something that really did not happen before. And we also we are able to also form a story that does not dismiss our Palestinian identity while demanding equal partnership. which is also amazing. I'm not
possible.
I'm not going to expand on that. I think Fidat also will have a lot to say about that. So I'm not going to expand more on that. Actually, I'm just going to stop here because Jessica and Fidat will have a lot to say. I just really wanted to give you a picture because I think we are so extremely overlooked, and I truly believe that the Palestinians in Israel are the key to really starting thinking, even envisioning some kind of a just solution and really advancing peace, equality, and social justice in Israel and Palestine. And thank you. And I'm sorry if I talked over the time.
No, Sally, thank you very much. I think you've provided us some amazing insights, especially into the youth, which, you know, in South Africa, that's a very topical conversation, especially at the moment. So Jessica, if you begin, and I'll give you a 10-minute call.
Okay. Thanks for having me, and it's great to see some familiar faces, and really encouraging that JDI is still going and going strong. So really happy to be here with all of you. As Gabriella said, I'm heading a human rights organization called Hamoked. Previously, I was director of B'Tselem. So I'm speaking from, you know, the perspective of the Israeli human rights community. My organization, Hamoked, is primarily focused on legal aid, providing the individual assistance to Palestinians from East Jerusalem, from West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And when we think about women in this conflict, I mean, I think there's two halves to that question. One is how the conflict is affecting women, and the other is what is the role of women in solving and resolving the conflict. So if we look at the first half of that, you know, often the situation here, there is either a blindness to gender in the conflict in terms of the harm that occupation is causing, or, you know, all of the headline events, the victims are men. I mean, the dramatic events of this conflict are clashes, are arrests, are, you know, the events that occupy the headlines. And almost none of that is what my organization is dealing with. And I think, you know, the people who call us and need our assistance, the people who come physically to our office asking for help, it shows, I think, the day-to-day reality of what actually military occupation means for Palestinians. And for most Palestinians, occupation is a permit bureaucracy. It's not those dramatic headline events that can be really horrific, but are affecting a relatively smaller number of people. Israeli military rule over the Palestinian civilian population means you need a permit often to live in your home. You need a permit to move, you know, from anywhere, to enter Jerusalem, to travel between the West Bank and Gaza, even within the West Bank. If you live, you know, behind the separation wall or want to get to your farmlands on the other side, you want to travel to visit family in Jordan, you know, not to mention to work inside Israel, you need medical care in an East Jerusalem hospital. So that's most of the day-to-day reality of Hamoked's work. And then you see, you know, the role of women and the role of men and how the occupation is affecting them differently. We had a big, and I would say confusing, let's call it a victory last week, when the Knesset didn't renew this ban on family unification between Israeli citizens and residents and Palestinians. For 18 years, an Israeli citizen or resident who was, let's say, an East Jerusalemite, or you know, a Palestinian citizen of Israel, or even a Jewish citizen of Israel married to a Palestinian from the West Bank or Gaza, they couldn't live together. And this was a temporary law. I don't want to go into too much detail, but was passed again and again for a year and another year and another year for 18 years. And then in a very surprising turn of events, because, you know, the right now wants to embarrass this government, something that, you know, we've been campaigning against this law for 18 years and thought we had no chance, particularly in this government, you know, where of course the opposition would also be supporting it. But no, again, by this very surprising turn of events, the law fell. But what this law meant, I mean, again, the disproportionate effect on most of the victims of all of these restrictions on family unification, whether it's in Israel or also you have really severe restrictions on family unification in the West Bank. It's women who are living in their homes with no legal status. It's women who then, you know, in some cases never leave their little neighborhood for fear that they will encounter soldiers and won't have the right ID and can be deported. You know, also when you think about home demolitions, or teenage boys that are being arrested. Also, it's, you know, mothers that are calling us about, you know, how can I find my kid, and you know, can we speak to him, and how can we see him? And also, I think, you know, to think about how the conflict is affecting Israeli women. And I mean, I think we are, you know, we need a more sophisticated analysis. I think we're long past, you know, this very simplistic view of, you know, women are the victims, or women are necessarily more, I don't know, going to be more committed to justice. You see now increasingly women in the Israeli military, women, you know, at checkpoints, women violently dispersing demonstrations of Palestinians. You know, it's not anymore that we can say men are the violent ones. It's all because of men. Let's let women run things and everything will be fine, right? It's not that simplistic analysis anymore. And it's enough to look at the Knesset, which on the one hand, we have more women members of Knesset than ever before, but you have, you know, our Minister of Interior, Ayelet Shaked, you know, one of the most extremist and you know, activist about going about pursuing her ultra-nationalist, anti-equality, anti-human rights agenda. So of course, it's not enough to say, you know, there is a theory that if you have one woman in government, or you have, you know, 2 or 3 in, you know, among 30 men, they're going to act just like the men, you know, or sometimes even worse. They have to be competing to show that they're good enough, and that you need some critical mass. They say, like, let's say a third is the critical mass for, you know, if there is a different leadership style of women, or a different politics, the way women do politics, that could only be expressed when you have that critical mass, which they say is 33%. So we just had one more woman Knesset member sworn in, I think last week. We have this new law that a minister doesn't have to be a member of Knesset. So they vacate their seat, and then a new Knesset member comes in. So it was a woman that was sworn in. We're just below 33%. I think we're at 30%. So I think we still don't see, you know, some whole new sort of leadership style that would show, you know, what does feminine politics look like, or what does feminist politics look like. In terms of the human rights community, on the other hand, it's overwhelmingly women that are working in human rights organizations and leading human rights organizations. I mean, if government and politics and the military are really dominated by men, it's always been the case that civil society is dominated by women, whether because it's, you know, undervalued, and then once we start valuing those professions, more men go into it, or because there is some, you know, the explanation that women are more sort of nurturing and empathetic and looking to help people, that is another explanation. But, you know, certainly there is equality or even over representation of women in the civil society organizations. And I think that is, you know, obviously a cause for optimism in terms of, and also new generations of women that are coming into these professions, choosing to go into both politics in the Knesset and political social activism outside of the Knesset. And as Gabriela mentioned at the beginning, that you have new feminist and women's organizations explicitly calling for peace organizations and an end to the conflict. And I mean, I think that what is crucial is a bridge between those those activist communities, that it's very easy for Israeli society to be looking inward, that feminist struggles and women's organizations are looking at the situation inside Israel as if occupation has nothing to do with the struggle for equality inside Israel. But of course, we know that those two things are very closely interrelated. I mean, it's enough to think about militarism in Israeli society and how the very central role of the military, and then what that means for violence inside Israeli society, for the way that men, I mean, one of the most clear career paths to enter the Israeli Knesset is to be a general, a retired general in the Israeli military. And that is, in 99% of the cases, that's a man. We have one female general in the Israeli Knesset, but it's the exception that proves
Jessica,
the rule.
You're on 10 minutes, just to let you know.
Yes, thank you. So the main message, again, because it's crucial to see all of the struggles as being linked and to understand the way occupation corrodes the Israeli democracy, that we can't be fighting for, you had two high court rulings, or three this past week, one on the nation state law, one on surrogacy, and the third, now I'm blanking out on the third, but as if we can talk about, the rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel, the rights of Palestinians under Israeli military occupation, and that's, somehow distinct from, we can be very liberal in talking about the rights of gays and lesbians or women's rights, and at the same, the same court that is very restrictive and harsh and illiberal when it comes to the rights even of Palestinian citizens of Israel, but certainly in terms of occupation. That is a corroding effect on the democracy for all of us, certainly in terms of women, that we have to be, to understand the way that occupation, I mean, in its own right, we need to be fighting to end the occupation, but also because it is corrosive for the Israeli democracy and for the possibility for advancement and rights of women inside Israel.
Thank you, Jessica. In the interest of time, I'm going to go quickly on to Fida's presentation. Unfortunately, Sally does have to leave us a little bit early. She has a prior engagement, so hopefully she'll be able to get one question in after Fida speaks.
Okay, marhaba. So good evening, everybody. Actually, when I hear Jessica and Sally, the first thing that I want to talk about, and I didn't thought that I will talk about it, is Khalida Jarrar. It's a parliament member that in the jail, in the Israeli jail. Her daughter died suddenly yesterday, and she cannot give the government of Israel didn't give her the permission to say bye to her daughter for the last time. And everybody here talk about Nelson Mandela in 1970 when his boy I think, died, and he cannot be there with him. So this small sad story, actually, as a mother, it's really hard for me, but this is, when we talk about the occupation, this is the situation in the very small details of the daily life of people that connect. I have a family in Nablus, Shechem. I don't know how we call Nablus in English. Nablus? And
I think it's Nablus.
Nablus, yes. And I can see, like most of the Palestinian family in 1948, we suffered, and each of the family get to another area, or in Israel or outside of Israel, in the West Bank, in South Lebanon, all this. And this situation, and now we have a group in Facebook for all the family, and I'm not talking there, I just see how they want to see picture of any event in the family, just to feel that we are with you, or send any video, and all these small things of the life really make the situation, it's not just sad. We should understand that occupation separate family, it's a violence by daily life, but from the small things that happen, like Jessica said, and then it's really the violence that the soldier use, and the settlement against the people. I live in Nazareth, which is inside Israel. Like Sally, we are citizen of Israel. We are Palestinian citizen of Israel. And as a woman, we first of all, like all the women in Israel, in the first circle, that there is no equal between man and woman in Israel, like there is no equal between man and woman in all over the world. But the second circle of discrimination that we live as a woman is being part of minority, I can give you a small story. When I enter the Knesset for any interview or any meeting, I can see, when they see me, you cannot, in Israel, you can see sometimes people, if they are from the West or the East, and they, they are very nice to me. And then I give them the ID, and they see my name as a Palestinian, and everything changed. And it's something, and when people say me, we cannot realize that you are Arab or Palestinian, they think that they say something very good to me, but it's really sad. And this is the situation. This is the daily life of racism that we live here inside Israel. And the third circle of discrimination as a woman who live inside Israel, Palestinian woman, like the living inside a very patriarchal society, our society, the Palestinian society. My situation as a divorced woman who live alone in Nazareth, make it more complicated. And when we talk about the Palestinian minority in Israel, most of them are living in the periphery. And 55% of the Palestinian minority is under poverty, live under poverty, which means we can say another circle of discrimination, another circle of discrimination. In the meantime, the Arab women are all the time just going up. They are more in academia, they are more opens new door and new challenging and making change. The feminist Palestinian movement are really very active and part of the feminist movement in all over the world and in all over the Arab world, and inside Israel with the Jewish feminist woman. All this bring me to say, I feel very privileged, even when I'm Palestinian. I came from a very political active family, which means I never afraid from things, never afraid I can do. My family choose to move and to live in Neve Shalom, which is really the most privileged village, I think, in all over, not all over the country, but it's the only village that Arab and Jewish choose to move to live there. And now they are really, all of them are privileged. My family is not there. I grown up in a family that give you the opportunity, first of all, as a human being, and then as a woman. And it's not happened to all of us. The most hard thing that can happen to me as a feminist Palestinian activist woman is raising two feminist activist daughters. And it's really hard, It's my challenge every day. And they was in the street in May 2021. Now, they was in demonstration, they want to say talk about their identity. They talk about their identity every day here in the house, but there was a movement, and it's still until now, of youth who want to be more contact to their identity. And it's important. And this is what will help us to build a strong shared society. If we will have strong Palestinian society, we can build a strong shared society. And it will help us to end the occupation and to make all our land, from the sea to the river. I don't believe in one country. I believe that we need to take care that everybody in this area will live under democracy and equal life for everybody and human rights for everybody. As an activist in a lot of group of women, and I think what's really amazing about women, activist women, we can be we use our emotion, and it's important, and we are building a friendship. And it's different when you build a friendship and not just partnership. It's make you more contact and more talking in a level that friendship is different than partnership. Partnership is good, but when you have friendship inside the partnership, it's make all the strategy different. And our way of struggle here, even when we have a demonstration in front of the checkpoint of Kalandia, we do it differently. We do a demonstration in Kalandia from the Palestinian side and from the Israeli side, women from both sides. And it's not enough. We, as a feminist movement, we stopped to talk about the occupation. And I think this is the moment that we need to come back and talk more and more about this situation. I just want to add to the things that Sally said. So when we talk about build a strong Palestinian society, we talk about poverty, we talk about violence and crime, what Sally said. We talk about now in Israel, in this day, today morning, they destroyed home at the south. This happened today, okay? And we talk about the situation that there is homes and women and children that they don't have electricity and don't have water in these days, in these really hot days in Israel. This situation, just a Palestinian minority living. From the other side, we need to build a for us. Wait, I forget the name, the award. Equal opportunity for each other in education, in employment. And the most important thing that happened, we all the time remember in different crises, is talking about narrative and identity. We are part of the Palestinian nationality, and we are part of Israel. This is a very unique and very hard part of our rule, but this is the reality. In Israel, they want us to be a citizen who have good education, good employment, and don't talk about identity. It cannot happen. After, in 1976, it was the year that I born, there was the land day. They asked people, شو يعني איך אומרים שלטון צבאי? الحكم العسكري.
Military law.
So the Arab minority inside Israel lived until 1967 under Jessica, how we said?
Military law.
And after a few years, they bombed the land day. Another time, after the first Intifada, we have few years and we have the October 2000. And after the second Intifada, and after this time that they say for us as a minority, think about education, think about employment, don't talk about identity. We see what happened in May 2021. And now the youth in Israel, my daughter don't need to see news in Israel. She have in the Instagram direct relation with youth in Gaza and youth in the West Bank, and she can see, and in Sheikh Jarrah, and she know what happened. She don't need me, she don't need the Israeli news. She knew the truth directly. And it's really strong, and I think it's really important to them. And so actually, sometimes they ask me in the first 2 weeks in May, Mama, do you really still believe in partnership? And I think it's important that they will ask me this question, because if they will not have their own part and talking about their own identity and their own narrative and take time just to be with the Palestinian youth, it's important. It's a good part of building a shared society. When you are very safe in your identity, it helps you a lot to meet the other in a very equal point and not just in a different. And I want to stop the last thing, the last sentence. Yes, the last sentence. Our role in Shatil actually is to connect organization, and it's to build a infrastructure for all the organization. And when you connect organization, you build power, and power will help us. And I talk about power as a feminist, okay? It helps us to make a change and different balance inside Israel. And this is the next level for us in Israel, to build a strong Palestinian society, a strong shared society, and a strong democracy. And I will stop here.
Thank you for speaking. Sally had to leave us to go to another engagement, but she wrote in the chat that if anyone has any questions for her that aren't answered by Jessica and Frida tonight, just to email her, and she did put her email address in the chat. I think let's go to questions. Please, if anyone has any other questions, we'd love you to write them into the chat. But I see there's a question here from Cheryl, who says, how do you feel the May events impacted on shared society initiatives? It was encouraging to hear Sally's point that it saw unprecedented solidarity of Palestinians with the Jewish left that mobilized towards peace and partnership. My sense of it is that in many situations, it has created more strained and difficult relations. Your perspectives on this and how it is moving / where it is heading would be valued.
Well, I say one sentence and then I let Fida, who I think has more insight. I mean, I think it's both. It was a scary month for all of us. And, you know, for Jews, we are used to a privileged and very comfortable situation. And then it is very threatening. And for many, a surprise that comes from nowhere, the anger of you know, Palestinian youth in Lod or in Jaffa. You know, for most of us who are not paying attention, it's a shock, and then also raises really existential questions about, you know, right away jumping to very extreme conclusions, you know, that this represents all Palestinians in Israel, that, you know, there's no way to have peace or build, you know, a joint community together. And at the same time, you know, you did have an outpouring of, you know, both communities speaking out against violence, extending a hand to people that were harmed. So I think, you know, you can find, and then it really depends, you know, what you are looking for. You can find really heartwarming manifestations of solidarity, and you find really, you know, scary violence and hatred even.
Thank you, Jessica. I will continue from the last point that you say. Yes, first of all, any crisis, I see it as an opportunity. And it came to tell us something. And I think it came to tell us it's not enough to talk about equal right as a citizen. We need to talk about the conflict. We need to talk about the occupation. We need to talk about different identity and different narrative. The situation in Israel that we, the Palestinians, know more about the Jewish story, narrative, collective narrative. and they don't know. They don't know that I have a family in Nablus, and I'm really feel afraid about them. They don't know that when you see youth who talk about their home in Sheikh Jarrah, it's bring me back to the Nakba, to the 1948. Most of the Palestinian, I think, when you accept their pain and when you hear them, we almost finish the problem, because most of the Palestinians who live inside Israel want to live here together in a partnership. They don't want to leave Israel, but we cannot have the solution if the occupation will still be here. And I think this crisis, we were more prepared for this. We have more strong shared society, we have more organization. Sally is not here, but standing together immediately got into the street and say, Arab and Jewish standing together and not separate. And in 2000, when we talk about October, the second Intifada, the police shoot the youth. And there was 13 youth who killed by the police. This demonstration, there was a lot of violence, more than 2,000 arrested, okay? But still, nobody killed by the police. The two people who killed, sorry, there was just one young man in Al-Fahim that killed by the police. So I think we work a lot in this 20 years as a civil society, as a shared society organization, and we build the Palestinian society. We still need a lot of work, but it helps us to get from this crisis more quickly. For the youth, and I can talk here about my two daughters, it's important to give them their space. You know, it's important to give them their space to build their identity. And then because when they will feel safe in their identity, they will still here, they will go to university in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa, they will be more meeting and talking with Jews. We need here meeting and talking. You should understand, there is separate life. Even I lived in a Jewish city for 15 years, and the only shared society that I have with my neighbor is good morning and good evening. That's it. And I work in shared society organization, okay? You should understand that in the community, there is less and less connecting. And it's something that was different this crisis. More and more people in shared cities talking and try to go and talk outside. I don't know if I answered your question, but the important thing that I want to say, the crisis is the opportunity for us to take the level of building a shared society and building a strong democracy here in Israel, take it to a more deep level and ask ourselves questions that we didn't ask until now. And it starts to happen. It's important.
Thank you, Fida. Before we ask another question, I just want to remind everyone that these events are available and possible by your donations. And I've put into the chat again the bank details of JDI and our PayPal link, and a request as well to consider donating to the 3 organizations that have been represented tonight: Jessica from Hamoked, Fida from Shatil, and Sally from Standing Together. And the links for those 3 organizations are also in the message I just sent. That's our pitch. Does anyone else have another question? Otherwise, we have some other questions available, but if you do have more questions, please put them in the chat. I think maybe we can have 1 or 2 more questions. In the meantime, I actually have a question. And I feel that we've sort of touched on the new coalition government, but perhaps just Fida, you've provided us a beautiful message of hope, but do you extend that same hope to this government? What is your take on their ability to enact lasting and meaningful change for Israelis, Palestinians, women, especially in terms of its, very ideologically diverse range of parties?
Oh, it's a complicated situation. I think, first of all, what Jessica said is important. There was never discussion about not the national law,
the citizenship law that prevents
citizenship law. It's more than 18 years. It's passed like this. And this time, before it didn't pass, and before that, there was 2 weeks discussion. And what's good in this government is that nothing is sustainable, and nothing, and it's amazing. It's a good opportunity to make a change, and it's the start of the change. I cannot say that I'm not happy that Netanyahu is not here. I'm really happy. But still, the head of this government is Bennett, and Bennett came from the settlement and his ideology. It was really hard for me that people like Gabi Lasky and Mossi Raz, which is really very active against the occupation, and help a lot of family, especially Gabi, that vote with this law. So this is really complicated situation. And if the question is about the Arab party that in the government, this is not the partnership that I see, okay? When I talk about partnership, it's partnership that you can bring your narrative, I can bring my narrative, and there is place for each of us. I talk about equal relation, I talk about making decision together, I talk about making real change in this situation. And this is not the situation of this government from one hand. From the other hand, it's a good opportunity to discuss and to take a lot of argument. And you know what? The first important thing, that most of the Jewish in Israel think that all the Arab is the same. First of all the Arab is not the same. I'm a feminist. Mansour Abbas is against feminism and against freedom and for women and for LGBT rights. So we're really different, first of all, for example. The second thing, that they can start to imagine that Arab people can be in the government, okay? So this is really changed the situation, and it's a challenge for us as a left in Israel. It's really big challenge for us. It takes me, I think, 3 weeks until I understand, okay, Fida, this is the situation. We need to deal with this. And actually, it can bring a lot of opportunity to make a change. For example, in the issue of violence and crime, that really we suffered. Today, a youth died in Kalansawa, a village near Kfar Saba, killed, not died, killed. It's important because there is a very, very, wow, I'm really sorry. It was
very serious.
Very serious discussion about government responsibility to make a change in this situation. So this is a good opportunity. It's really changed even the left, I think, and it brings us to ask questions. And it's changed a lot the majority, the Israel, to understand that Arab are citizens and they can be part of the government. Maybe I missed part of the question, but I will stop here.
No, but I just echo what Fida says, because it's confusing for all of us. I mean, I think the key word is an opportunity. It's not the government any of us wanted. It's confusing for all of us. I think also for them, the right and the left, within this coalition, the Arabs that are inside and the Arabs that are outside. I think we all have to think about how we can be effective. What do we want to achieve? It's not the government that's going to end the occupation, but, to take a few baby steps forward to be promoting, basic values of equality, of equal citizenship for Arab citizens of Israel, that they are legitimate voters and they are legitimate politicians that can be making decisions on behalf of all of us. This is huge. I mean, it seems obvious outside of Israel, but huge inside Israel, to think that we could have Arab ministers, that it's completely legitimate, that they are making policy also for me. So, you know, we have a lot of work to do, but I think
Yes.
we have what to work with.
Yes, I agree. Definitely.
I'm very conscious of the time, and we did say an hour. So for those who do need to leave, thank you very much for coming. Perhaps we could have one last question, Jessica and Fida, if you have another 5 minutes.
Yes, yes.
There's a question, Fida, for you from Barbara, and she asks that, she says, Fida, you referred to the privilege of living and going to school in Neve Shalom. Can you comment on whether the philosophy, values, and approach to identity has gone beyond the borders of Neve Shalom?
And if not, why?
If I understand the question, I'm really sorry. I talk Arabic and think in Hebrew and talk in English. So sorry.
Maybe restructure it. Maybe I think what, Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, I think she's saying many of us are very familiar with the model of Neve Shalom and the amazing work that's come out of it. Really, I think what she's trying to ask is, to what extent have those values and philosophies, you know, been spread throughout Israel? And if they haven't been spread that far throughout Israel, why not?
I actually left Neve Shalom when I was just 12 years old. And I can say why. I think there was a political argument after in the first Intifada. And I think because I start to be a teenager and my father afraid that I will be in love with a Jewish man. And it's important to see our different circle of discrimination. So, and I talk about men who really believe in partnership, but when it comes to his daughter, it's not. I can say for you that my daughter now, if she will have a Jewish boyfriend, for me, it's okay. We already talk about it, but Neve Shalom is a very, 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 very privileged. We have a joke in Israel that Ashkenazi Arab and Ashkenazi Jewish living together. It's a really very, very privileged village, and now not everybody can enter the country. But it's Neve. It's
an oasis, an oasis.
An oasis in a place that everything, most of the things are separate. So now there is a lot of courses for different kind of, for social work, for lawyer, for different kind of people that working together and take the partnership outside of the village to everybody. But I can tell you about my family. I think families give a lot of good basic for making a change, and the opportunities that I get after that. When I was 18 years old, because of Isha L'Isha, it's a feminist center in Haifa, I get the opportunity to be part of feminist women, Arab, Palestinian, Israeli, and Palestinian from the West Bank, and Germany women for 10 years. So this is for me the opportunity to discuss with the other things and discuss with myself my identity. And when you do it in a very small place and alone with the same people, I don't think it's enough. We need to take this to outside, if I understand. But I want to say another thing very important. We cannot just talk. We need to action together. We need to do things together. And action is not just demonstration. Action is a lot of things, and not just democratic. You know, action can be now Jewish and Arab women will go and visit and have a small demonstration again in front of the jail that Khalid Jarrar is, and it can be going to Lod and being with families there and try to play with children. Action, because we learn from action and not just from sit and talk and discussion. Neve Shalom for me, this is my life, and I say about it this is the most important present that I get from my family, because a lot of things. First of all, when I talk in Hebrew, nobody can understand that I'm a Palestinian. And I like to play with identity. Sometimes I use it. It's like in our place to use identity and play with it. It's amazing with Arab and with Jewish, for both sides, without saying my name. I choose to be activist from my community, from Nazareth, because I feel if each of us will do change in their community, then we can connect all the small or big activity, and together it will build a power and make a really change. Like the feminist movement, we each of us do something indifferent, and together we build the power that make it change. We still have a long way, but I think we are in a good way, and it's not good, but we still, I cannot lose the hope. The moment that I will lose the hope, I will leave the work and open a restaurant or something. I don't know. Hope is this is our food for activism and for building a shared society and for making a change here in this country.
Thank you, Fida.
Thank you, Fida. That was
Thank
beautiful.
you.
I think there's no better way to end off. So thank you everyone for coming. Jessica, Fida, thank you for speaking to us tonight.
Thank you.
Sally's not here to
Thank you.
Thank you to Sally. If anyone would like to get in contact with JDI, I put the email address and our Facebook and Instagram handles in the chat. We'd love to continue this conversation, perhaps one day in the future. And yeah, have a good evening, and to everyone in South Africa, stay safe.